That's funny. My computer's not making any noise, but I can hear Aiko's computer. Who knows?
Can they hear you?
They can hear me, yeah. So I'm going to share. Okay, try plugging it in now, Aiko. Let's see what happens. I hope you're all seeing my first slide. So, you know, I've quoted Ezra a number of, I'm sorry, Fareed a number of times in many different contexts, and so I tuned him in. He enumerated three mistakes. I'm not going to go through his post-mortem. It speaks for itself there, but identity politics, which we'll start talk a little bit more about, and the pile of the Trump prosecutions. Now we've got a lawyer on board, so Gary might weigh in on that later.
Can we comment on these, John?
Of course, immigration, that was the big one.
He can't hear you.
Oh.
Yeah.
Homer, I can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, we should raise our hands anyway. Can we comment on those just briefly?
He wants to comment on those briefly.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, okay, go back one slide. The identity politics. I heard of this ad that Trump ran over and over again in the battle or the blue wall states. It was, they talk to them, I speak to you. That was quite powerful. And then
for some
reason you can't hear me.
I can hear you now, but I just can't get the slide to go back. Sorry.
Well, don't worry about it. And then the other one was, I don't know how the pileup of legal charges against Trump is a Democrat problem. That would seem to suggest that the Democrats were behind the prosecutions and investigations, and they emphatically were not. They went to great pains to leave it with the Department of Justice or the state prosecutors and not to get involved themselves, especially not Biden and the White House.
Facts don't matter.
Right.
Well, how can it be a Democrat
deniability?
Okay, it was a problem, but it wasn't a Democrat mistake. They didn't do it, but it was a problem.
Yeah, I'm going to get to the unfairness of some of these judgments in just a second.
All right.
So, Ezra talked about the headwinds, and he talked about the limited maneuverability. That if Kamala broke with Biden, she'd be accused of disloyalty. Ezra thought that a lot of it was inevitable, that there's this global post-pandemic, post-inflation, anti-incumbent backlash. Turn it down a little bit. And on the right, the Tories have lost in Britain. Japan, the Liberal Democrats have lost, but also on the left, Sweden, Finland, Portugal, Canada, those governments have lost or are about to lose. And then Ezra asked the question, why didn't Trump win by even more? And he thinks Nikki Haley would have. And so the choice of Trump narrowed the depth, the breadth of the GOP victory, rather than aiding it. And how to best illustrate Kamala's quandary. So I've been dealing with the metaphor of headwinds and decreased maneuverability. So those of you who are sailors, I'll just throw this up. I asked CHAT-GPT to generate an image of Kamala's limited maneuverability in the face of a headwind. And this is what it came up with. Harold, you got your hand up.
Oh, I didn't. I need to put it down again. But yeah, I was thinking that in my mind, Kamala never made a sale. She was, as far as I was concerned, she was an empty suit. She never really said what she was for, other than she didn't have any disagreements with Biden, and yet she claimed she was new and she was for change. It just didn't compute in my mind.
Yeah, well, you can't argue with that. Shigeko.
I listened to America at a Crossroads last night, and Bronstein said that 70% of the people in the country were unhappy with the present administration, and 60% were unhappy with Biden. So there was no way that Kamala Harris could have won this election.
Yeah, that's very good, Shigeko. You set me up. I'm going to talk about Bronstein.
Oh, okay.
He was one of the, I think, very wise analysts. David.
Well, you didn't mention it, but I don't think we're ready for a woman. I think there was a lot of the Latino voters and marginalized voters who want a strong man. And I think to underestimate that is maybe a little naive.
Yeah, I can't argue with that either. Okay, so other people have started to blame Biden, and I don't think that's fair. I really don't. And I'm going to go back and deal with what if. Turn it down. Counterfactuals are very interesting to me because you have to consider a lot of variables, and you have to consider history. But go back to 2016. He was vice president. He was the logical candidate that should have run. But he was skipped over by Biden, who anointed Hillary from his team of rivals. And I can see why he did that. It seemed like a creative move at the time. But think of it from Biden's point of view. He was in no shape to put up a fight for what should have rightly been his, because he was in mourning over his son, Beau. If he had been allowed to run and he had a term like he just had, when it came up for re-election, he wouldn't have been in his dotage. So there's that. Of course, there's any number of other things that could have gotten in the way, and it's not a clean case. But Helen Cox Richardson, who a number of you have, I know, also read, she put, and I'll go over her praise of the Bidens 4 years, but I'll get to that. And if you look at what Biden actually accomplished, he actually passed many of Bernie's policies. One criticism is that he ran too far to the left before what the country was prepared to do. But I'd make the case that he maybe got through more of Bernie's ideas than Bernie would have been able to do had he been elected. Here's Shigeko Ron Bronstein. He's from the Atlantic, and he is one of the sharpest statistic analysts. And Bill Kristol had a million. Bill Kristol is, of course, right of center. but he is also a never Trumper. And he had him, Brownstein, on before and after the election right away. And let's look to what Brownstein said that Shigeko heard last night. Brownstein said the most noticeable thing was the uniformity of the election. Trump improved his vote share in 49 of the states. 90% of the counties moved towards him. But it's the smallest popular vote margin for a winning candidate.
John, we can't let that one go unchallenged.
So you can say that, oh my God, it's a landslide, but it was not a landslide. There'll be other points.
He can't hear you. John, if the other guy had won by that much, it would have been a landslide.
But it wasn't. It's not a true statement. Trump in 2016 did not have a popular vote margin. Neither did George W. Bush against, his first run for president. They were minority candidates. So of the Republican candidates who won, his was the smallest margin, but two others didn't have a popular vote margin. So it's a misleading statement.
Well, a good point. Good point. So let's move on. We'll be looking at other statistics and plenty of opportunity to criticize those too. So Brownstein's point, it was really the big shared national experience that spread out all over the country. Inflation, the border, maybe crime. And as Shigeko said, 70% thought the country was on the wrong track. He did not think that it was shaped by tactics or message. He's like Ezra. He sees this as kind of a global post-COVID reaction. And so it was urban, suburban, rural, they all moved. But the popular swing, Trump's popular margin was only 1.5%. And that is Ezra says, I think this is Brownstein. It's the first Republican majority since 2004.
Exactly.
He repeats the smallest since Nixon. I'll have to parse that later, Homer.
Well, he says it. He says
so
it's the
pandemic inflation. It was everywhere. Pent-up demand, decreased supply from shut down businesses, and then all of a sudden, everything's back online and demands through the ceiling. So the world saw that, and the inflation hobbled all the incumbents. But historically unpopular presidents like Carter, Bush, and Trump, they've all lost after one term. So this was fulfilling a historical pattern. Even if presidents step aside, the following election of an unpopular president, their party loses. So Truman left in 52, LBJ left in 68, W. Bush left in 08. So an unpopular president leaves a shadow. 2/3 of the voters said the economy was in poor condition, and 70% of them voted for Trump. 46% of people said they were worse off than 4 years ago, and 80% of them voted for Trump. The 40% who said it was inflation, they voted for Trump 2-1. Okay, so who was wrong? James Carville was wrong. And boy, oh boy, did I take heart from the wisdom of this Democrat operative. He promised us. He was certain, because Trump is stone ass nuts. But he forgot his own wisdom. It's the economy, stupid. And I think that's really, if I had to pick one thing after all that I've read, sure, the animus against a woman, but I think the number one thing would be the economy. I think it had more valence than any other issue. And this was even though inflation has moderated substantially. So here's the cover of The Economist the week before the election. The envy of the world. And I think a lot of this is lingering PTSD from 3 years ago when inflation was 20% plus. Those prices have stayed high, and people resent it. This is in spite of a very good job market, a strong stock market, manufacturing up, and the infrastructure bill. It's going to take effect. The sad irony is it's going to take effect during Trump's presidency, and of course he's going to take credit for it. And some of it has to also be laid to the illiteracy of the voting public when it comes to evaluating economic factors. Presidents rarely have that much of an effect immediately, but they're blamed for things that are beyond their control. And so memory fails. The Democrats passed the infrastructure for the Rust Belt. They got the green energy going. Biden was the first to walk on a picket line. We forget that. The Federal Trade Commission was taking down monopolies and bolstering more consumer-friendly policies. Biden created 12 million jobs, 12 million jobs, more than Clinton did, more than Carter did even, and behind only FDR. Clinton and Carter were in third and fourth place. So it's FDR, Biden, and Clinton and Carter. Lifted wages for the bottom 80%, just like Bernie would want, and Ramsey would want, by the way, and setting multiple stock market records. All this is from Helen Cox Richardson. Barbara and Carol turned me on to her a long time ago. So memory fails also.
Can I raise a question?
They forget how things really were in the Trump presidency. Let's see. So, Michael, you've got your hand up. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, you just fell into the trap. If you go back a slide, you're conflating what happened during his presidency and saying he created 12 million jobs. He broke up monopolies. I mean, there's this idea that if it happens during his presidency, he's responsible for it. And if he's not responsible for inflation, he didn't create 12 million jobs. I mean, that's the problem. People couldn't connect what Biden's policies were with Biden.
Good point. I'm covering a lot of different analysts, and some of them contradict each other, and you've picked up on one of them. So people forget what Trump was actually like. His approval rating during his whole presidency barely got above 40%. And at the end, after January 6th, it was in the 30% range. But during the campaign, it started to rise a year ago, and it ended up being 50% approval rating for his retroactively for his last presidency. Boy, oh boy, that's hard. That's hard to, and makes me weep for democracy. When people are unhappy with the status quo, they're willing to risk the unpredictable future. This is a Bernstein point. They'll risk an unpredictable future and to get rid of an unacceptable present. So here are the favorability ratings of Donald Trump, and he was all these things: a threat to democracy, an unfavorable view of him. Nevertheless, these are people who voted for Trump. So there's a lot of cognitive dissonance. And they even disagree with his policies. Yes, Harold.
My take on why Trump's popularity kept going up and the Democrats couldn't focus on what was good, they kept bashing Trump and indicting him for this and that and the other. And you remember old Joel Chandler Harrison and the Brer Rabbit and Brer Brer and Uncle Remus?
Sure do.
The Democrats were like Brer Rabbit, and Trump was like the tar baby. And the more they beat up on him, the more entangled they got, and the more they started looking like the bad guys, picking on poor Donald. That's
I
my
like
take.
it. I'm a big fan of Brer Rabbit and Uncle Remus. Yeah, they did. And you know, when you think back on it, the withdrawal from Afghanistan kind of set the tone, and it was hard for Biden ever to get his favorability back on the rise. Yes, David.
You know, somebody said facts don't matter, and I think that's true. But this was a sort of a race between head and heart, because I think most of us are pretty intellectual and we want to look at the facts and blah, blah, blah. But a lot of people voted with their emotions. He's going to make us feel safer. I like him more. He says good things, even if they're lies. I mean, he gave an interview in the AARP that said he was going to drop the price of gas to $1.50 a gallon within 12 months. And it wasn't contested, and it's total cockamamie. But people like that. It makes them feel good.
Yeah. Uh, yes, he's cast his spell over the electorate, that's for sure. But even the policies, 2/3 disagree with the Supreme Court that struck down abortion. And of the 10 referenda that were on the ballot in this election, 7 out of the 10 that involved abortion passed, and the 8th in Florida got a majority of 57 that fell just short of the 60% required in Florida. So Toby and Gary have just left Florida. And I'd be interested if they had any comments about this referenda. The majority has said they oppose mass deportation, which, if we have time, we'll talk about later. and they believe that the undocumented that are here should have a chance to apply for citizenship. Half the voters want the government to be more involved with health insurance, yet you have Mike Johnson talking about ending Obamacare. And then half say they want the government more involved in ensuring that kids are vaccinated. But RFK Jr. is set to run wild in the health departments. Um, um, and what if he does do a mass deportation? What's going to happen when all the necessary workers leave? I don't know if any of you ever saw this movie. It was brilliant. But there's going to be a problem there in just getting necessary work done. Tariffs, everybody agrees, is going to increase inflation. And there's going to be stories in the newspaper, like there were before we got Obamacare, of tragedies of the uninsured. They'll start appearing in the newspapers. So the fact that he had such a low margin of win, I think there'll be a low tolerance for his poor performance. Yes, David, he makes people feel good, but there's going to be a price to pay if they don't. Trump is just going all in on RFK Jr.'s conspiracies and his vaccine stuff. And even does not want to allow local communities to institute mask mandates, no matter what their public health officers say is going on. Sure, I understand the libertarian argument, but there's also the argument for the rest of us that are sending kids to school, and they're going to be threatened by the outbreaks of measles. I think there was an outbreak that manifested itself at Disneyland a few years ago, and they traced it back to
measles,
decrease vaccination. So besides measles, polio, whooping cough, it's not going to be pretty. And so about masks, I asked CHAT-GPT what it thought about masks, and it gave a thumbs up. I don't have to tell this audience with medical doctors that one of the great miracles in the last century of medicine has been the vaccines, and here's the track record of all the diseases and by how much they've been decreased. Slam dunk. The expansion of Medicaid, extension of Medicaid, put more than 10 million citizens under healthcare using Obamacare. It's popular with 62% of the population, yet you have the Speaker of the House talking about acing out Obamacare. You talk about work requirements for some of these programs, that even though it's been overturned by the courts. they're talking about bringing back the bare bones health plans that were allowed to flourish during Trump's first term. And they're a cruel hoax because you don't realize how bad they are until you're sick. So they're misleading consumers in that sense. Even the contraceptive mandates, they're talking about removing the morning after pill. Of course, there's been an assault on mifepristone, the medical abortions, and we'll see what happens with that. So all this cognitive dissonance, what does that mean? It just means that they are simply ignoring things that might happen, things that the downside they don't want to accept of all these programs that are going to have potentially bad consequences. They suspend their disbelief. But Trump, and this is the tragedy of democracy in a sense, Trump, even though he has a thin majority, thinks he's got a mandate for all his pet projects. And I like this quote: even though voters have no idea who or what they want, and likely wouldn't be on board if they did, if it were all spelled out clearly, like healthcare. And so one analyst sees kind of a seesaw of extreme policies, particularly over the last 30 years, where you have 50-50, but each time a party wins, it thinks it's got a mandate, and it becomes more radical than the electorate wants, and they get thrown out. And 4 years later, it's kind of like an electoral trap, and so it all comes from. At this moment of hubris, the party activists believe that they have a mandate, and we're going to see that, I think, looking at who the personnel are and the policies are, big time in the next few years. Trumpism, I like this quote, is an incoherent jumble, at once dovish and hawkish, libertarian and activist, traditionalist and revolutionary, authoritarian and anti-establishment, all at the same time. Michael.
Well, the one thing that I take away when I see how dysfunctional Congress is, at least they have been, in my view, for at least this 4 years, they can barely get anything done except name post offices. They kick the can about the budget down the road. The idea that they want an authoritarian leader. People can't look to the congressional branch of government, the legislative branch. They want an authoritarian, and they want somebody who's got simple answers and tells them what he's going to do, even though it makes no sense. So even I'd have to say, as far as the legislative branch, they can't get anything done, in my opinion. And I don't know how they're going to function over the next 4 years with a majority in both houses. And Trump's going to come up with all kinds of harebrained things. Will they be the guardrails? Will they act as some kind of force to restrain him? I'm very, very worried. That's my 2 cents.
Homer.
Well, Trump has started already with the Congress. Did you hear Rachel Maddow last night that Trump has issued he's announced that the majority leader of the Senate will have to be somebody who will permit him to propose judicial appointments during recesses, congressional recesses, so that the Senate will not have to consent to their appointment. He wants it just to be him. Only makes appointments when Congress is on recess. So they're to go on recess when he wants to make appointments.
Yeah, and the contender for the leader of the Senate for the Republicans is a senator from Florida, and he's all on board for giving Trump that, but he's running against two other contenders, John Thune from North Dakota and the senator from Texas,
South
Cornyn.
Dakota.
And here's the thing, Homer, it's a secret ballot. And so the senators can vote secretly and hide their vote from Trump. So I would be very surprised if the senator from Florida wins. Rick, I'm blocking on his name. Anyway, we'll see. And we'll see it, I think, by tomorrow. I think that's when the secret ballot is. I don't think they'll give him that authority. Because it's true that the public would like a stronger president, and it's probably why presidents have been increasing in strength. But the prerogative of the legislators in secret ballot may manifest itself. Matter of fact, I'm going to go out on a limb and predict that probably John Thune will win, and he's opposed to giving up that power to the president. It's funny that Michael, you mentioned the public and their desire for a strong president. Ramsey just sent me this quote today from H.L. Mencken, and I'm going to read it, and I'll put it up next week. But as democracy is perfected, the office of the president represents more and more closely the inner soul of the people. On some great and glorious day, the plain folks of the land will reach their heart's desire at last, and the White House will be occupied by a downright fool and a complete narcissistic moron. H.L. Mencken said that in 1920. 1920. So I'll throw that.
That is just great. That's great.
Okay. So I asked, in view of all these contradictions, I asked CHAT-GPT, how in the world could you come up with placards that would represent all those contradictions? And these are some of the things they came out with, complete with misspellings. It was not a landslide, and it certainly wasn't a realignment. And Stirewalt points out that if you looked at the percent of the Electoral College won, that Trump would be
your book club or whatever it is,
fourth with James Garfield. So it certainly was not an Electoral College landslide. And he does point out it's the first time that we've seen an incumbent party lose 3 consecutive elections, which fits the seesaw theory that one party gets into power with a bare majority and goes extreme and gets thrown out. And we're used to Obama and Clinton. They got reelected, but we haven't. And so did Bush, and I'll talk about that in a second. But Trump was well behind in terms of the Electoral College, Obama and Clinton. And the other sign of hope, the swing states shifted only about 3 points to the Republicans. And he thought that given the environment, that was Harris could be proud that given the environment, it was only 3 points. So this is an interesting analysis. The only president since 1980 that Trump did better than was George W. Bush, who had 50.47% in that discredited election of 2000 with the hanging chads and all that. This is a little bit abstract, but I thought it was interesting. If you go back to the 2004 election and compare how the best candidate in 2004 did compared with Harris. For the men, Bush, he was plus 11%, and so was Trump. Trump didn't win any more men than W. Bush. On women in that election, Kerry was +3, Harris was +7. So she did do better with women than the Democrat in 2004. And so on race, for the white population, Bush was +17, Trump +13. Not as good as Bush. The black vote, Kerry was +77. Harris was plus only 67. So that's a drop off. That's interesting. On Hispanics, we talk a lot about Harris losing a lot, but we might, if we're back to 2004, she did better than Kerry did with Hispanics. On age, young people, Kerry was +13, Harris was +10. Early on, we were hoping that Harris would do well with the youth vote. Kerry did better. In the middle age range, Bush was +7, Trump was +5, Trump +7. And with older people, Bush did better than Trump did. And union households, Kerry did much better than Harris, and I think this reflects the fact that the Republican Party has somehow refashioned themselves to be the party of the working class. So Stirewalt thinks, hey, look, we're back to 2004 in some sense, and the time since then looks like a deviation from the norm, not the new normal that we thought it was. And so this is what we were talking about earlier. This was really one on negative polarization. I'm going to make the argument that transgender rights were so distorted by the Republicans. I think it was like Willie Horton in 1988. I think it was like the Swift boat lie that sank Kerry in 2004. But just making this a major campaign issue which is something Harris hasn't even commented on in the last 5 years, was the example of how shrewd the Republicans can distort the political landscape. And they spent 17 million ads highlighting her one statement about gender affirming medical treatment. It aired 30,000 times, particularly on football games. And of course, 61% of Americans have a common sense attitude towards transgender athletes. And so that was I think one of the big issues. So we can wring our hands, but it's not easy to see any humility in the Republicans now. And their hubris, they may make a hash of things that'll cause a realignment shuffle 4 years from now. David Brooks, his advice was come up with a Bernie style disruption, something that'll make me uncomfortable. In chaos, there's opportunity. As I point out, a lot of Biden enacted a lot of Bernie's policies. So I don't agree with that. And then the question about history repeating. Grover Cleveland was the only president before Trump to win 2 non-consecutive terms. And if that's a harbinger, it was a mistake because his party wound up losing out for the next 30 years. Who knows if history will repeat itself? Ezra, he gives the example of the realignment after 2004. He called that the most total rejection of liberal policies that he's experienced until now. And in 2004, like now, the lies and the failures of Bush, just like the lies and failures of Trump, were clear. But they both have won. But Bush won cleanly as opposed to the year 2000, but it was misleading. It was a disaster. His second term was Katrina, was subprime collapse, and the Democrats taking the White House for 12 of the next 16 years until now. So Ezra sees a similarity. He thinks it's quite possible that these guys will egg Trump into ideological overreach, and he predicts corruption that we haven't seen. It'll be even worse than the first term. So that's Ezra's take on it. He points out that if you're feeling in despair, just think back to 2004, and if somebody had told you that a guy with the middle name Hussein from Chicago, who was African American, would win Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Indiana, you wouldn't have believed them. And so strange things can happen in politics. But Ezra said it has to be something new voices, going to new places. And it's going to require a lot of conflict. And he used the word curiosity quite a few times. Curiosity, that the Democrats have to be curious about what went wrong. So I asked ChatGPT to illustrate Ezra's prescription using all these concepts. this this is what it came up with, a fantasy type thing. I won't dwell on that. So how are we fixed for time? So I'll do deportations next week and leave that and just throw it open for any other. We've covered a few grounds. I think we all have a lot of emotion about what happened. So take it away.
Well, I guess I'll start. I've had my hand up for 20 minutes. First up,
I couldn't see it, Jim. I'm sorry.
okay, I didn't know you couldn't see it, or I would have butted in earlier. First of all, I want to say prepare to be surprised. I will not be surprised if Rick Scott is leader of the Senate, but we'll see. He can't do much worse than Mitch McConnell. I have three comments about why the Democrats lost that haven't really been touched on. I agree with the misogyny. All these facts that you put up in The Economist, no one reads The Economist. What I learned on NPR, I mean, what they said is true, is that mainstream media no longer dominates the news cycle. It's Fox and online stuff, and X, Musk, and Twitter, So they are not getting the facts, most of the electorate. Secondly, I would say that people like an entertainer, and that's Trump's background. He's an entertainer. He tells humor. Arnold Palmer's genitals are, something to smile about. So people are entertained. They like that. And the last thing, just to be very quick, is turnout. No one's really talked about turnout other than you said it was a narrow victory, a plurality. But there were people stayed home. Trump got about the same amount of votes, but she got $15 million less than Biden did in 2020. So turnout was a big factor. I'll stop.
Okay. Other comments? Yeah, David.
I don't know if anybody heard Gavin Newsom on Friday, his webcast. It's worth a listen to because he really talked about how he's going to protect California. He's worked with Trump before. He knows what they're in for. He's already got a special Senate of the California meeting and planning. And one of my favorite lines he had is, Trump's just like the rest of the Republicans. They come with a list of grievances and no constructive projects. They're happy to tear shit down. They'll get rid of this, get rid of that. But when you really get down to what is the policy and what are they going to really do, he'll cite, I'm going to make gas $1.50 a gallon, drill, baby, drill. But, we're already doing lots more of that under Obama. So a little plug for Gavin's 30-minute talk and hope. He really talked about grace and listening to across the aisle and really figuring out what we did. I've always liked Gavin. I know not everybody does, but it was pretty inspiring to think that we're in the 5th largest economy in the world here. And if Trump starts mucking with the money he's giving California because he wants to, whatever, piss people off here, Gavin's going to go to bat. And I think that'll be an interesting piece to watch next few years.
Yeah, the point that Trump's a lot of bluster, you know, in the debate, he said he had a concept for replacing Obamacare. As one wag said, Trump is no Hitler. Hitler could have gotten rid of Obamacare.
Right.
Bruce.
Yeah, the thing that came to mind that somebody had sent is are you familiar with the word catastrophe? Yeah, at any rate, it's the definition of it is it's a government run by the worst, least qualified, or most unscrupulous citizens. And the word was coined as early as the 17th century. So it's been around for a while. The other thing which was interesting is one of the, this is a hearsay again, but from my son-in-law, that the most Googled word was tariffs after the election, and that nobody had an idea what a tariff was. And then, of course, the second most Googled word was, how do I change my vote? So, at any rate, all nonsense. It is what it is.
That's good. If just to expand on that, has anybody else seen the movie Idiocracy?
Yeah, I think so.
Very apropos. Okay. Any other comments?
You know, we've all talked about explanations. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I think when I watched Kamala Harris, the more I watched her, the less interested I was in her. And I think the bottom line is she did not have the leadership chops. And all these other explanations don't speak to that feeling of heroism and inspiration and charisma that you get with people like Clinton and Obama. The more they talked, the more you wanted to see and hear them. And it wasn't true with Kamala Harris. She didn't build the longer she was running. And I have to say that may have been what really collapsed the possibility. In spite of all these other explanations and parsing of numbers, he won by 70 million votes over Harris. That to me is egregious. He did get the popular vote. And that's sickening. So I don't know what to say. You know, we're left here with this hollow feeling of trying to explain it. But a lot of the explanations might be much uglier than the ones you proposed today. Why didn't abortion come across as a major issue in America? Why didn't people vote for a woman? Why didn't people vote for a Black? You know, those are things I think we have to look at.
Why didn't the abortion thing pass in Florida? You
Because
just
they needed
recently left
60%.
there.
That's a lot to ask for. Just getting it on the ballot, the governor did terrible things to keep it off the ballot. He spent a fortune to keep that from passing. I don't know what lies went on there because I wasn't voting there towards the end. We left there in July. We voted in the primary and we voted in California, you know, in this last election. But I had heard there was a lot of dirty things going on, a lot of money out to undercut that particular, and 60% is a lot to ask for. When you've got an amendment in Florida, if you remember when they passed the amendment to allow felons to vote, Remember what was done to that? That was totally not allowed. There were 80,000 possible voters, 80,000 possible felons, and what they did to that. So they really were able to undercut it. That's what I think.
Okay, thank you. Okay, other comments? All right. Well, I'm glad to see so many people here and some new people like Toby and Gary. It's great to see Harold back after a while. So, okay. See you next week.
Well, thanks for that, John. That was
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
big. Yeah.
Good job.
Thank you.